Hi, welcome to my channel in Conversation with Nivedita. Today, I have with me here the founder director of Rereeti Foundation. She believes that museums and heritage sites are important spaces of learning. We have often heard that where you learn makes a big difference to what you learn, how you learn, and most importantly, as an educator, I feel how much you retain and apply later. Don't you think so? Wait, have you subscribed to this channel as yet? Go ahead. We will get to reimagine education together. Hi, I'm Nivedita, and with me I have today Tejshvi Jain. Hi, Tejshvi. Lovely to have you.
Hello. Thank you very much. It's great to be on your show, and I'm really looking forward for our very interesting talk. Thank you.
Lovely. So, Rereeti, museum, education. How do you link these three words?
Museums are in India or perceived as very dead spaces, and in fact, they are an underutilized resource as an education resource, and that's what Rereeti kind of aims to bridge that gap. So there's a small story behind Rereeti and how we came
Yes.
about. So Reeti is traditions, and museums are holders of traditions. And Rereeti is looking at revitalizing these traditions, and hence Rereeti. And the idea of bridging museums and education. While I was the curator at NGMA in Bangalore, we realized that there were school kids who came to the museum, but they would just go in one line, go across the museum and out. There was no learning or no engagement happening.
Yes,
Uh,
I remember
and I
doing it
felt,
as a school child.
yeah, and I felt so sad. It's like, guys, there's so much you can learn and you can, have fun.
Mm.
And that's where I realized that, we are not equipped to kind of use and harness the collections and what museums have to offer. And hence, the idea of bridging museums and education.
Oh, I'm still grappling with this thought because when we see the museums abroad, you always see uh, a teacher with children following with a sketch pad in hand, and they hang around the museum, and you see a circle of children sitting around and a teacher and a person from the museum having a conversation. I am
Yeah.
honestly yet to find a museum in India where I have had those sites, and I am a fairly ardent museum goer, and I'm an educator, so that these things are very upfront in my mind, but I don't see it happening in our country. Is there a specific reason? Because we have wonderful museums in India. It's not that we have lack of them.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you that there are very few museums in India who have recently started doing this. When Rereeti started, there were hardly any museums doing that.
Hmm.
Now, across 7 years, we have seen that a slight improvement, at least in some of the museums.
Hmm.
I remember when I was working at the museum, when I saw this, I was like, no, this cannot happen. And then, I designed a small treasure hunt game for the younger kids, and it was very successful and very well received, and that kind of encouraged me to, okay, let's go do more stuff. And then when I left the museum, I realized that the other museums were not, as I said, they did have an education officer, some of the museums, especially the government museums, but they saw their role as kind of just supervising when the kids came to the museum, and not actually kind of engaging them with stories and collections. So I think it's more to do with capacity building uh, within the museum professionals and also the teachers. There is also this perceived thing, no, that you go to a museum, I don't know the stuff, so how do I take my kids there? So that fear also, and then there's too much of logistical issues and planning and all that also is a deterrent factor for teachers. So these are a couple of issues which kind of are holding museum professionals and the educators to kind
Right.
of come together and use the wonderful, things which a museum offers.
Right. So
And
I have,
systems are not there in
yeah,
place, and that's what,
yeah, I can
you know,
imagine that because I didn't know as an educator, and I have been in this profession or passion for nearly 20 years now. And I didn't know that there is an education officer in a museum. I had just now that you are saying, I am getting to understand that there is a person like that in the museum. Otherwise, as schools, we would apply and say that we are going to bring so many children of so many that grade into your museum, kindly grant us permission. So museums were only granting us permission, and we would go with our teacher. So if it was a history kind of a museum, we would take the history teacher. If it was a science museum, we would take the science teacher. If it was
yeah,
an art kind of museum, we would take the art teacher along with. And most of the time, it would be the first time that teacher herself
also
was
visits. Yeah,
visiting the
yeah.
museum. So where
Yeah.
is this is gap? You said capacity building. So is that the gap? I mean, they don't have capacity, or is it interest, or is it not worth the time spent, or what is it?
So it works both ways. We need to kind of develop the museum sector and museum professionals, and we
Mm,
also need to kind of make the teachers aware that this is
mm,
available for you guys to kind of
mm,
come tap into, speak to the education officer, tell them their your requirements, and this is what you plan to do. And at the museums front, they need to be more accessible, and approach the traditional thing is that people will come to the museum,
right.
whereas some new age museums and forward thinking museums
Yeah.
kind of are making a very strong effort in reaching out to people,
Mm, mm,
reaching out to schools, telling that this is what we can offer you,
mm,
come get your kids.
mm,
For example, the Indian Music
mm,
Experience,
right.
IME in Bangalore,
Yeah.
there's a lot of educational initiatives and programs
Mm, mm,
which they kind of reach out to schools and say this is something which we are offering.
right.
MAP, the Museum of Art and Photography, is also kind of
Right.
doing that.
Right.
CSMV is also kind of is reaching out to museums through their bus initiative, but this a very handful of museums doing that, and even within that. So earlier when I started it, there were hardly anybody, as I said. No, they would come to the museum, the education officer would take them around, and that's it. Some of the education officers who were really passionate and had some stories to share would share one-off stories, but that's when they are asked for. But
Mm,
there was no like a structured mapping of what is the syllabus uh, requirement and what does the museum offer, and then kind
right.
of merge and kind of create modules which are relevant for teachers. you
Right.
know I think
Yeah.
that is still something which is needs a lot of working on. There's a
Right.
huge scope in that,
Right. Right. Right.
and that's what we do at Rereeti. That's when we approach, we have an advantage versus other museums, that we can tap into a lot of museum content,
Mm,
from various topics, various museums.
mm,
And even if a museum is just doing for their collection, a mapping of what the requirements, of the teachers are, is something which really needs to be taken into consideration by the museums also.
right. So who
Because
is
teachers
the
are,
target? Who is the target of Rereeti then? Is it teachers? Is it the museum professionals? Is it children? Is it parents? Who?
so
How do you go?
it's like how we kind of even our programs, we
Mm,
encourage multiple dimensions and not just one approach.
okay.
Similarly, we're looking here at revitalizing museum spaces.
Mm,
So it's we kind of approach it from different angles.
mm,
We work with the museum professionals in terms of increasing their capacity and their skill development. We work with schools and students also to kind of make history relevant, reachable, and relatable for them, and with teachers to kind of bridge the gap and make them comfortable in how to use museum as a resource tool.
Right.
That's often something which, teachers are little unclear. They might want to use the museum, but they don't know how to go about it in a way which will add value and decrease their work.
Right.
you know
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's said that going to a museum is so much of a headache, so much
Yes.
of planning,
Yes.
logistics, and after all that, what is it in the end?
Mm.
How does that help the teachers, educational burden? How does it
Yeah.
reduce?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you've touched upon a very key point, because any field trip is looked as a whole world of pain of logistics and managing and informing parents and collecting money and ensuring the safety of children. So the logistics completely overwhelm the already overworked teachers, and that's a fact. The
Exactly.
teachers are seriously overworked. It
Yeah.
takes away their time, and it also, according to the prevalent feeling, is it takes away curriculum time. So how
Exactly.
is it going to help a teacher, which is a big barrier in terms of accessing
Yes.
museum for education for their class, their subject, their school. um,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I think
Absolutely.
mapping curriculum to teacher work to museum, I think there are many points of friction
Yeah.
here, which
Yeah, and that's the job of the museum educator, in the museum, to kind of do this exercise and then offer it to the teachers, and then
right,
even offer that how to go about, you
right.
know when we plan our initiatives, we go to that level of detail that we also prepare the letter for the parents which they need to send out to,
Mm, mm, mm.
so we are taking off a lot of that burden from the teachers plate,
Right,
and just so that they can focus on the core, which is when they come, they can spend time with the educator, with their children, and make the most out of that field trip. uh, it's not just the field trip, it goes beyond that, where museums can be used as resources, just not a one time resources, and that's what we are looking at, where
yeah,
teachers can come and tap and harness what the museums have to offer on a regular basis, not just as a field trip. Yes, you can
right.
start off as a field trip, but museums definitely do offer much more than one field trip.
Walk me through one of your projects of which you have done with schools and with children, a physical project and possibly a virtual project, because in current times, and I think that has also opened a door for us to do virtual trips to many museums where we may not be able to go immediately, but it may excite us to go in the future. And how does this physical virtual work? But fundamentally, walk me through how the project plan works for museum education, or education in museum, or museum in education, whichever way you want to look at it.
Um, so our physical exhibition, which was a great, great hit, which is often also spoken about now when we, meet teachers and students from those
Mm,
schools,
mm,
is our World War One project,
okay.
which was named as White Pepper, Black Pepper, because those were the code words which were used for, British soldiers and Indian soldiers.
Oh,
uh, and that exhibition or that project looks at India's contribution, and more specifically the then Mysore state's contribution to the World War One. Because often when we did our survey, we spoke to people and they said World War One, that's something in Europe. India had nothing to do with it.
mm,
And the little who know that India had something to do with it
mm,
did not know how crucial the Mysore state was in
okay.
the Battle of Haifa,
Mm,
or the whole thing that the Brits won the war, and it's written in writing by their captain that it had it not been for India's contribution, we would not have won the World War One, and that is such a significant contribution India made. We almost emptied out our wealth, supporting them, and yet we think that we had nothing to do with the war. So that was a very important, eye opener for a lot of people in Bangalore. Usually we do these projects. So there are two things which we do with education and museums and schools. One is where we ourselves create these, long-term 1-year projects and, a traveling exhibition where we are reaching out to students and schools, because, to eliminate. So earlier when we started off, we used to take these learning modules in the museum, which were really effective, but we found out that it was too much of a headache and too much of communication and logistical issues, and then budgets also had to play a major role for schools to come in, so they were unable to come in. So we said, if schools cannot come to the museums, we will take the museums to the school. And that's how the idea of the traveling exhibition came about. So the idea is, it's usually a year-long project where the first 3-4 months, we do our own research and come up with, the content. Then we have school engagement workshops where we partner with a few schools, and the students become co-curators along with us. So they
Okay.
are not just consumers, but they are
Mm.
also, developing and creating stuff.
Mm.
And that totally changed the way they looked
Mm.
at history. They looked
Mm.
at them city, you
Mm.
know, they looked at World War I.
Mm.
A lot of, it just changed the way they
Yeah,
approach
yeah,
things now.
yeah.
And then their content and our content gets fed into a traveling exhibition, which then goes to different schools and public spaces. And we believe in being really inclusive. And when we are setting up the exhibition, also the school students help us set up the exhibition, which is kind of also, for them, it's a great learning of how to set up a temporary exhibition. And also they become guides, and for their peers, so they take the tours within the exhibition.
Right.
And this exhibition also, one of our strong focuses on the exhibitions are that it has to be sensorial in nature.
Okay. Okay.
So this was all, with using the five senses. So we had sound, we had light, and the sound effects of a battlefield. Then we had smoke, so you actually felt as if you were in a battlefield. And then it was undulated grounds
Okay.
and dark spaces, and they were like narrow, spaces through which you had to navigate to read the stuff. So you have to take a torch and read what was on the
Okay.
panels. So
Okay.
it really gave them that, they transported them into that,
Mm.
era and that space. And then they were absorbing things. So it had a very strong effect. I remember one of the girls who came after out of the exhibition was crying. you know she actually experienced the whole thing, and that is what we are looking at, a very emotional and emotive
Yeah,
experience
yeah.
we want to have with kids. And the kids said, they did not know so much, our contributions about, for the World War I. And the way we do it is also very, it's very consumable, I feel, and very interactive, in the sense, if there are numbers, so many liters, or so much of food was given, or so many clothes were given, as part of the donation, instead of just giving a number, we kind of interpret it in a way which stays on your memory. So we would say that, so much food was given that it could feed, the whole of Bangalore for 6 months, or
Okay.
the whole of Australia for 2 months, things
Okay.
like that.
Mm.
So it's quantifiable, because numbers don't necessarily stick on
Mm.
and does not mean anything.
Right. Right.
So that's how we interpreted the information, and made it more accessible.
Mm. Wow.
So
So
that
one on side history and the other side music. And have you what
museum.
other subjects of museums have you worked upon? We are going to give the description of those museums in the links, so that children can, and parents, and hopefully educators also can start accessing
Yeah.
those spaces.
And in our virtual space,
Mm.
we had started with virtual tours, where, as I said,
Okay.
we have the advantage of, tapping into different museums and
Mm.
collections.
Mm.
So we've taken tours to Muziris, to Hampi, to the Indus civilization, to
Mm.
1857.
Mm.
And the idea is to not just, kind of take them to the space, but we do a lot of interactive activities which the kids need to do.
Okay.
So, for example, if it was the Indus Valley, they had to do a town planning exercise, So
Okay.
we make it relevant, because a
Right.
lot of the times we've looked, we've said, oh, history is so boring. Why do we need to study? It's not going to get me jobs,
Tell
you
me.
know? Yeah.
That's
But
the
what
era I
happens?
grew up in, because history and geography were okay, nice to have, but not something
Exactly.
which you can, which is usable.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we do it at Ritihas, where we are looking at history, which is
Mm.
Itihas, and re-looking at it and making it reachable, relevant, and relatable to the school students, and how that can be applied to their own lives. Because if you
Right.
don't have a connect, it's of no use. And education, we need to look at something which adds value to us, and not something which is read in books and forgotten.
Right.
So that's what we aim, we focus on all our virtual or online projects.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, how do you think parents or school can access this program? They should just connect to you with you on the
Yes,
website, or how?
through our website, through our social media, we have a very strong following on
Okay.
Instagram, Facebook. On our website, you can, we have a newsletter. You can subscribe to that, so you'll be updated whenever we have these, projects. Right now, we are doing a very interesting project on partition and how Bangalore as a city responded to it.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay.
so far, whatever partition stories we've heard, or the
Yes.
literature, the research is all up north.
Up north,
There's,
yeah.
yes, there's not much spoken about the
Mm.
south.
Mm.
So while the south did not have just a influx of people coming in, it was slightly more planned, because you had to come down. So if you didn't plan for the journey, you could not just run away and come.
Mm.
So the city kind of responded in a very different way, by setting up colonies, by setting up associations to help the refugees. And all
Okay.
that is not known. And how,
Yeah.
the influx of Sindhis has also kind of changed the way we kind of approach, and in the business, or in our clothing, or in our food.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has impacted in Bangalore. So those are the stories which we want to kind of, bring out
Yeah.
through
I'm
that project.
as
So
always
yeah.
fascinated by what you do and what your work is. It's an enviable job. It's a lot of infusing excitement in me already, and I can continue to go on. But for now, I would like you to leave us with final thoughts on um, what do you think is how do you think we can reimagine education with Rereeti in current times and in the short future?
Yeah, education during the COVID has really questioned, during COVID times, all of us have been questioning what is
Yes.
the value of education. So I think we're at a very interesting stage,
Mm.
where we are going to see a huge turn in the way education is approached, schools approach, teachers look at it. um, the way we see it at Rereeti is kind of making, using the museums more as their resources. So and not limiting themselves, because museums offer a a window to a lot of things, and a lot of hands-on activity and hands-on stuff which they can do at the museums. And they have authentic stories to say.
Right.
And it's not just history which museums tap. We have science museums, and even art museums, where you can learn about science. So
Okay.
this interdisciplinary nature which museums offer
Mm.
is something which definitely needs to be tapped into.
Right.
And real life experiences, museums can offer schools and students real life experiences by offering and working in the museums as internships and small shadowing. So it's a huge resource house. How schools use it is up to them, and how much they want to engage with it. But at various levels,
Right.
at the
Right.
students, it could be from a very educative one-time visit field trip to a recurring, visits for the students.
Right.
Teachers also also need a breather. They need to upskill. Not talking about the proper teacher education skill sets, but also just broadening and understanding different cultures,
Right. Right.
how they
Yeah.
influence. That also helps.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The kind of experiential exposure that a museum can give
Yes.
can be quite phenomenal. Of course, provided we know that there are educators in museum, and we know that that they are actually accessible, that we can do more than just take queue up the children and move through
Exactly.
it.
And they are
And
spaces to develop our empathy muscle, curiosity, muscles.
yeah,
And those are things which are the skills which we will need in the future,
yes,
storytelling.
yes,
All these are
yes,
things which we will need in the future.
yeah,
So
yeah.
museums offer a great platform to, work on those and harness those skills
I would
within
agree.
ourselves
I
and for
would
our
agree. Yeah.
children.
Every artifact in museum has a story, isn't it? Only it needs to be
Yes.
told. That's all.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh. Thanks, Tejshvi, for joining me today. There's so much to be done to reimagine education. As we know, I wish you and your team, Rereeti, all the best um, to show us some
Thank
more
you.
fascinating ways of learning to our students, parents, and most definitely community of educators. Thank you very
Would
much.
love to. Thank you. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
If you'd like to hear more of what's happening in education, subscribe to this channel so that you're alerted of new content. Happy learning and bye for now.